Let her stay quiet. Asian women, they are taught to submit. They don't have the fighting spirit we do. The words were a venomous whisper, not loud enough to stir the room but sharp enough to slice the air. They were spoken by a giant, in both stature and ego, a man who believed the world bent to his will. In his universe, the silent woman across from him was nothing more than a confirmation of his rotten prejudice. He didn't know that his whisper had been heard by someone he didn't even care to acknowledge. A person standing in the shadows, a person considered invisible, and he didn't know that his whisper wasn't the end of a negotiation. It was the spark that ignited a revolution. The air in the Apex's private dining room, a place where the fates of corporations were routinely decided, was thick and suffocating. It wasn't quiet, but the heavy silence that precedes a storm. Outside, the city stretched below, a glittering tapestry woven from diamonds and sapphires, a silent testament to power and ambition. But inside this room, power had its own sound, the clink of silverware against china, the gurgle of ruby-red liquid pouring into crystal, and above all, the booming voice of Richard Sterling. Richard Sterling didn't just sit at the table, he owned it. He was a human volcano, an endless eruption of loud laughter, braggadocio, and a pervasive smugness. His expensive Brioni suit seemed too small to contain his massive frame and even more massive ego. He talked of yachts and hostile takeovers, with a tone that assumed everyone at the table was desperate to listen. Across from him, on the other side of a universe, sat Anya Hayashi. She was ramrod straight, still, an oasis of calm in Richard's storm. If Richard was an erupting volcano, Anya was the deep, still lake at its base, its surface a perfect mirror, its depths unplumbable. Her suit didn't scream its price, it whispered perfection. Every movement, however small, was deliberate. Her silence wasn't an absence but a shield, a wall that Richard's noisy words couldn't penetrate, only rebound from, making him sound increasingly ridiculous. And threading between these two worlds, in a dimension of her own, was Chloe Brooks. To Richard and his entourage, Chloe was invisible. She was a shadow in a black uniform, a pair of hands that knew how to pour wine and clear plates. They didn't see her, but Chloe saw everything. Her invisibility was her superpower. It allowed her to observe without being noticed. Her eyes were a scanner, cataloging every detail. She saw the jaw of Anya's assistant clench every time Richard made a crude remark. She saw the tight, fawning smiles of the lawyers. She didn't just hear what they said, but what they didn't, the hesitation in a reply, the tension behind a throat-clearing cough. It had taken Chloe a grueling 6 months to get into this room. 6 months of back-breaking work, taking the worst shifts, smiling at the rudest guests, all for a spot serving in these VIP suites. Not for the tips, but for a game she had orchestrated herself. She admired Anya Hayashi, a woman who had broken every barrier, and she despised Richard Sterling, a man who embodied everything rotten and unjust about the world of power. Tonight, those two worlds were colliding, and Chloe had placed herself right at the epicenter. Richard's patience was wearing thin from Anya's silence. He needed submission, a sign of acknowledgement of his power, but all he got was mysterious stillness. So, he began to attack easier targets. "Hey, girl," he snapped his fingers, the sharp crack cutting through the formal air. It was a demeaning sound, a gesture reserved for an inferior. Chloe was adjusting a flower in a nearby crystal vase. She didn't turn immediately. She finished the task with slow, deliberate precision before turning, her face a professional smile she'd practiced hundreds of times. "Sir, more wine," Richard ordered, waving his glass at her without looking. "We need to celebrate our coming victory." He turned to his team and winked. "Right, boys." Chloe felt a hot, simmering anger rise in her chest, but she extinguished it instantly. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. But her hands, as she poured the deep red wine, were astonishingly steady. She poured it perfectly, not a single drop spilled. Energized by the wine and his ego, Richard became more brazen. He talked to his assistants as if Anya Hayashi were a piece of furniture. "I told you," he boomed. "Just let our geisha statue sit there. As long as the numbers make sense, she'll sign. It's what they're taught to do." The words were like a stone thrown into a still pond. Anya's assistant's face flushed, but a quick glance from her kept him silent. Richard's lawyers also shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances and avoiding eye contact with the other side. Only Anya remained still. But Chloe, who had studied her for months, noticed a subtle shift. Her shoulders seemed to straighten just a little. Her eyes, still on Richard, seemed darker, deeper. Chloe continued to move, clearing used plates. "Wait," she told herself. "Let him dig his own grave." Deeper, and Richard didn't disappoint. As the negotiations came to a close, as the lawyers exchanged final nods, Richard believed he had won. He leaned back in his chair, patting his stomach with satisfaction. He turned to his lead lawyer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper he thought only his allies would hear. But Chloe was standing directly behind his chair, preparing to collect the final set of cutlery. Her ears, trained to understand 8 languages, could catch the slightest sound. "She'll just sign on the dotted line," Richard whispered, a sneer on his face. "Managing a company run by a woman who only knows how to bow will be easy as pie." That was it. The fatal line, not just an insult, it was a complete stripping of Anya Hayashi's dignity, intelligence, and power, boiling her down to a vile prejudice. Under the table, Chloe saw Anya's hand, which had been resting in her lap, clench slightly. Her nails dug into her palm, a tiny, discreet movement, but to Chloe it was a silent scream. And in that moment, everything in Chloe became still. The anger vanished, replaced by a cold, clear focus. Hesitation evaporated. The 6 months of waiting, the grueling hours, the indignity, it all led to this moment. The game had been set, the pieces were in place. Her time had come. Clink. It wasn't a loud sound, just the bottom of a Chateau Margaux bottle tapping against the polished mahogany table. But in the room's tense silence, it echoed like a starting gun. It was no accident. It was sharp, deliberate, an end to submission and a beginning of defiance. All movement in the room ceased. The lawyers' heads snapped up from their documents. Anya's assistant held his breath. All eyes, drawn by an invisible force, fell upon the silent, black-clad shadow who had served them all evening. Mr. Henderson, the restaurant manager, was the first to react. He scrambled forward, his hurried steps almost a slide on the Persian rug. His composed, controlled facade had cracked, revealing the raw panic underneath. "Miss Brooks," he hissed, his voice a strained whisper. "Is there a problem? Pick up the bottle immediately." His eyes darted frantically towards Richard Sterling, a silent plea. A slow, malicious smile spread across Richard's face. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his massive chest, thoroughly enjoying the unexpected drama. "Relax, Henderson," he said, his tone condescending. "Looks like the little waitress is having a moment. Tough day at work. Let her vent a little before you fire her." But Chloe ignored them both. She ignored the trembling manager and the smug giant. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside her. In a moment almost too subtle to notice, her very being had shifted. The veil of the tired, invisible server had dissolved. Her posture straightened, her shoulders widened, and her chin lifted just a fraction. Her eyes were no longer blank but razor-sharp. Standing, there was no longer a server, but a force waiting to be unleashed. Chloe's first act was not a word, but a gesture. She turned, not to the clamoring men, but to the woman who had been the inspiration for all this. She faced Anya Hayashi and executed a perfect, formal bow, her back straight, the movement precise and full of reverence in the Japanese tradition. And then she spoke. "Hayashi-sama," her voice rang out, clear and steady. "Moshiwake gozaimasen ga, anata no meyo ga kegasareru no wo damate mite iru koto wa dekimasen." Watashi wa kono toki no tame ni junbishite kimashita. Miss Hayashi, I am so sorry, but I cannot stand by silently while your honor is being insulted. I have prepared for this moment. The words in perfect, formal Japanese, soft yet powerful, landed like a stunning blow in the room. Anya's assistant's mouth hung open in disbelief. Richard Sterling's brow furrowed, his smugness replaced by confusion for the first time. But most importantly was Anya Hayashi's reaction. For the first time all evening, her stoic facade cracked. A spark lit up in her deep dark eyes, a spark of profound surprise, of curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of hope. She looked at Chloe, truly saw her for the first time, not as a part of the scenery, but as an unexpected piece on the chessboard. Then Chloe pivoted. Her movement was fluid and purposeful. She faced Richard Sterling directly. The reverence in her eyes was gone, replaced by the coldness of steel, and she switched languages again. This time, German, a heavy, precise language, aimed at Richard's ego like a sniper's bullet. She knew from her research that Richard had failed spectacularly in a deal in Berlin, a failure he had always blamed on the inflexibility of the Germans, never on his own arrogance and cultural ignorance. Kulturelles Unverständnis scheint eine chronische Schwäche von Ihnen zu sein, Herr Sterling, Chloe said, her voice sharp. Sie verwechseln Stille mit Schwäche und Respekt mit Unterwerfung. Deshalb haben Sie in Berlin versagt, und deshalb werden Sie auch hier versagen. Cultural misunderstanding seems to be a chronic weakness of yours, Mr. Sterling. You mistake silence for weakness and respect for submission. That is why you failed in Berlin, and that is why you will fail here. Richard's face went from confused to livid with rage. To be attacked in the very language that symbolized one of his most humiliating defeats by a person he considered non-existent was an unbearable insult. What the hell is this? He roared. Mr. Henderson finally snapped out of his stupor, his panic now a desperate fury. That's enough, he shrieked, his voice cracking, spittle flying. You're fired. Get out of here immediately. Security. Richard let out a triumphant, wicked laugh. He had regained control. That's right, Henderson. Get this insolent girl out of here. But Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't take a single step back. She stood there, a small but steadfast lighthouse in the storm of fury. You can fire me, she said, her voice not loud, but cutting through the noise, but you can't silence the truth. Just as Mr. Henderson was about to reach out and grab her arm, a single gesture stopped the world. From the other end of the table, a perfectly manicured hand went up, not in haste, not in anger, it just went up. And then, a voice rang out. Stop. It was Anya Hayashi. She spoke in English, her voice perfect, toneless, and carrying an inexpressible weight. The simple word had the power of a royal decree. Mr. Henderson froze, his arm left hanging in mid-air. Richard's laughter died on his lips. The room, which had been in a state of chaos, fell into a profound silence even heavier than before. Anya Hayashi looked directly at Chloe, her eyes now holding nothing back. They blazed with resolve, with intelligence, and with an unshakable authority. She lowered her hand and gave her command, not to Chloe, but to everyone in the room. Let her speak. Chloe emerged from the shadows, her steps steady on the expensive carpet. She didn't approach Richard or Henderson. She walked directly to the negotiation table, where the multi-billion-dollar documents lay coiled like sleeping vipers. She stopped next to Hoshiko's lead lawyer, who was staring at her in stunned disbelief, and said, politely but with unyielding authority, "Excuse me." With a decisive gesture, she took the main contract. Her fingers skimmed over the thick papers with alarming familiarity. Richard's lawyer, a man with graying hair and a smug, plastered-on smile, let out a condescending chuckle. "Honey, please," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, as if speaking to a child. "What are you doing? That's a complex legal document. Give it back before you smudge it." Chloe didn't dignify him with a reply. She didn't even glance his way. Her eyes were fixed on the text. She flipped through the pages, fast and precise, not like someone reading for the first time, but like someone locating a passage from memory. She stopped. Her index finger tapped twice on a specific clause. Section 7B, Chloe announced, her voice now a perfect, unemotional Wall Street analyst's tone, sharp and devoid of warmth. The Intellectual Property Restructuring Appendix. Innocuous-sounding title. She looked up, meeting the gaze of Richard's legal team. But the language used here is a Trojan horse. It allows Mr. Sterling's company, post-merger, to optimize and sell off non-core patents without approval from the former board. In essence, her voice dropped to a cold whisper. It's a legal license to carve up Hoshiko from the inside. He would sell off Miss Hayashi's crown jewels for short-term profit, leaving her with an empty shell. The room was silent. The smile on Richard's lawyer's face froze and then shattered. He stared at Chloe, then darted a look at his colleagues, and panic began to seep into their eyes. Chloe turned another page, the rustle of paper, a thunderclap in the stillness. And Section 12, she continued, not giving them a second to recover. The non-compete clause, a masterpiece of deception. It's cleverly worded to bind not just Miss Hayashi, but any affiliated entity. And the definition of affiliated entity is so vague it could include family-supported charities, startups, even future generations. This isn't a business clause. This is a paper and ink prison designed to completely erase Miss Hayashi's legacy from the tech industry. Enough. Richard Sterling shot up, his heavy mahogany chair crashing to the floor behind him. His face was a beet red, veins popping on his temples. This is preposterous, a blatant fabrication. Who are you to make up these lies? Chloe looked up from the contract, meeting his fury head-on. Her expression was perfectly calm. I'm the one who heard your phone call, Mr. Sterling. Her cold, unexpected response made Richard falter, and in that moment of hesitation, Chloe delivered the killing blow. She slowly pulled her old, slightly scratched smartphone from her apron pocket. It looked out of place among the room's opulence, an artifact of the real world in a drama of the elite. She held it with both hands, like a soldier holding a detonator, a single tap of her thumb on the screen. For a second, nothing happened. The room held its breath, and then Richard Sterling's voice, unmistakable and oozing with arrogance and contempt, filled the room from the phone's small speaker. Just let her stay quiet. Asian women, they are taught to submit. They don't have the fighting spirit we do. Just put the contract in front of her, and she'll sign. There will be no resistance. The recording ended. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. It was a vacuum, a black hole that sucked all sound, all air. All color seemed to have been drained from Richard's face. The angry red vanished, replaced by a pasty, white shock of absolute horror. He looked like a building that had just had its foundations removed. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. His lawyers dared not look up. They stared at the table, the floor, anywhere but this humiliating reality. The only sound was a faint crack from an ice cube in someone's water glass. And then another voice spoke, breaking the spell. This deal isn't off the table, Mr. Sterling. It was Anya Hayashi. For the first time all evening, she spoke in English. Her voice was a revelation, perfect, toneless, and infused with a cold, absolute power. She rose slowly, not a sudden movement, but a controlled ascent. She walked around the table, her heels making no sound on the thick rug. She didn't look at Richard, the now shrunken man. Her gaze was fixed on a single person. She stopped next to Chloe. It's just beginning again, Anya continued, her voice like a judge's gavel, on my terms. Then she turned her head, just a fraction, toward Mr. Henderson, who stood frozen, his face a canvas of horror. And the first term, Anya stated, each word clear and ringing, is that Miss Brooks will be representing me for the rest of this negotiation. Get her a chair. That moment was like a tear in the fabric of reality. Mr. Henderson, a man accustomed to bowing before the power of money, now stood frozen, unsure which order of authority to follow. Anya Hayashi's command, however, cut through his hesitation. It held an absolute weight. With a pale face, he fumbled his way to a corner of the room where luxurious leather armchairs were set out for waiting guests. He struggled with one, its weight seeming a physical and emotional burden. He dragged the chair across the rug, the scraping sound the only noise in the room. He placed it next to the negotiation table, directly across from Richard Sterling, a position of equal power. The act, a simple rearrangement of furniture, was a coronation. Chloe looked at the chair. Then she looked at Anya, who gave a slight nod, a gesture of complete permission and trust. Chloe walked over and sat down. She didn't sit tentatively or arrogantly. She sat with a calm, solid presence, as if the chair were made for her. She was still in her simple black uniform, her crisp white apron. She gently smoothed the apron over the expensive leather of the chair, an act that didn't hide, but rather emphasized the contrast. It was a silent declaration. I came from here, and I will bring all that I am into this position of power. The sight choked the air out of the room. Richard Sterling, the man who had started the evening as a mountain, now looked like he had collapsed inward. He slumped back into his re-erected chair, but the swagger was gone. He was just a large, pale man, trapped between impotent rage and utter horror. Henderson retreated to a corner, trying to make himself invisible. Richard's lawyers were statues, not daring to look at their client, not daring to look at Chloe, their eyes fixed on the lifeless papers in front of them. Chloe placed her hands on the table, lacing her fingers. She looked directly at Richard. "We won't be amending the old contract," she stated, her voice articulate, with no hint of wavering. "That document is already poisoned by deceit. We will start with a blank page." She paused, letting the statement sink in. Then she laid out the first term. "First, the merger agreement will be drafted entirely by Hoshiko's legal team. Every clause will be transparent. All intellectual property will be absolutely protected. Strategic control after the merger will belong to Miss Hayashi." She didn't need to elaborate. It was a complete reversal. "Second," she continued, her eyes never leaving Richard, "this is not a punishment, Mr. Sterling. It is a rectification. 5% of the merged company's shares will be transferred to a new investment fund. This fund will not be for the profit of existing shareholders. Its sole purpose is to finance and mentor startups led by women of color and Asian women in the tech industry." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping but its intensity rising. "It will be managed by me. Your prejudice will become the seed for the change you always tried to prevent." This wasn't just an attack on Richard's finances. It was an attack on his ideology. It turned his own venom into an antidote. Anya Hayashi's lips curled into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile of approval. "Third, you will confront the toxic culture you've created. You will issue a public apology, broadcast on major media channels. The content of this apology will be drafted by our team. You and your entire senior leadership at Sterling Corp will be required to attend a mandatory 6-month training on diversity, inclusion, and ethical leadership, conducted by an organization of our choosing." And finally, Chloe turned to look at Mr. Henderson, who flinched at the attention. "We believe in second chances, but they must be built on a foundation of respect." She turned back to Richard. "The Apex restaurant will become the exclusive service partner for all Hoshiko events in this city for the next 5 years. With one condition. Mr. Henderson must complete the ethical management training alongside your leadership team. A good leader creates a good workplace." Each term was a hammer blow, shattering what was left of Richard's arrogant empire. He was cornered by the undeniable recording, the clear legal exposure, and the intense, invisible pressure from Anya Hayashi. He looked around, searching for an escape, for support. But his lawyers discreetly shook their heads. The game was over. A humiliating loss was better than total destruction if that recording went public. Anya Hayashi spoke, her voice a final verdict. My lawyer has a draft of a memorandum of understanding on his tablet. It summarizes all these terms. It will be sent to you now. You will sign it before you leave this room." Anya's assistant quickly worked on his tablet, and a second later, the phone of Richard's lead lawyer buzzed. He read through it, his face growing grimmer. He whispered something in Richard's ear. With a trembling hand, shaking with both rage and defeat, Richard Sterling took his Mont Blanc fountain pen. The pen, once a symbol of his power to seal multi-billion-dollar deals, now felt like a weapon he was forced to turn on himself. He signed the electronic agreement on the tablet that was brought to him. His signature was a scrawl, a scar on the page. The moment the pen was lifted, something in the room broke. As Richard and his team got up, they no longer walked with their heads held high. They stumbled out, a procession of the defeated, not daring to look back. The door closed behind them, closing one old chapter of power and opening an entirely new one. When the heavy wooden door closed behind Richard Sterling and his defeated entourage, it didn't just seal a loss, it sucked all the toxic tension out of the room. A stillness returned, but it was a completely different kind. It was fresh, full of potential, like the air after a city-cleansing rain. The scent of wine and expensive food lingered, but they seemed to have lost their pretense, becoming silent witnesses to a battle just won. Chloe remained in the leather armchair. The intense adrenaline rush had receded, leaving her with a strange emptiness, a deep but incredibly satisfying fatigue. She looked down at her hands, still a server's hands, but they had just orchestrated a spectacular overthrow. Anya Hayashi moved, her walk now not wary but fluid and graceful. She didn't return to her seat. She walked around the table and stopped next to Chloe, not as a boss to an employee, but as a general to her most courageous warrior. "Who are you, Chloe Brooks?" Anya asked, her voice now warm, devoid of coldness, and filled with genuine curiosity and undisguised admiration. Chloe looked up, her eyes tired but still clear. "I'm just someone who couldn't stand injustice, Miss Hayashi." Anya smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up her composed face. "No," she said softly but firmly, "you are more than that. Tonight, you didn't just save my company, you showed me how a silver bullet can take down a giant. Your intellect and courage are priceless." She paused, her gaze on Chloe full of consideration. "Becoming a vice president immediately is too hasty a jump, and it would be unfair to you. It would throw you into a political battlefield you're not prepared for. But I need your mind. I need your perspective. Immediately." She leaned in closer. "I'd like to offer you a special position, senior strategic advisor, reporting directly to me. You will be my eyes and ears. You will analyze deals, vet partners, and most importantly, you will be the voice of integrity in all of Hoshiko's decisions. Skip the usual ladder. I don't need you to manage a department. I need you right by my side, helping me steer this ship." The following months, Chloe Brooks didn't appear in business magazines as a new VP. Instead, she became a silent legend within Hoshiko. She was the quiet hand in high-level meetings, the one who could spot a legal loophole 5 lawyers missed, the one who could identify a cultural nuance that could sink an overseas deal. She had no official power on the organizational chart, but her voice carried more weight than any director's, because everyone knew she had Anya Hayashi's absolute trust. It was in this advisory role that the idea for an investment fund was born. It wasn't a punitive clause in a contract, but a strategy built by Chloe and Anya together. They realized that the best way to fight against men like Richard Sterling wasn't to take them down one by one, but to build a new generation of leaders to replace them. The Brooks Hayashi Fund was born from that, with Chloe as its executive director. Her hands-on experience and sharp insights, combined with Anya's resources and vision, created a force to be reckoned with. 1 year later, at the 1-year anniversary celebration of the fund, in a packed auditorium filled with the radiant faces of female entrepreneurs who had received funding, journalists, and industry influencers, Chloe stood at the podium. She was no longer an unknown but a respected leader. After her inspiring speech, during the Q&A, a young reporter raised her hand. "Miss Brooks, your story has become a legend. But I have to ask, a year ago, when you were just a server, facing a man as powerful as Richard Sterling, were you scared?" The entire auditorium went silent, waiting. Chloe looked out into the crowd and found Anya's eyes in the front row. Anya smiled and gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together. Chloe turned back to the reporter, a calm, knowing smile on her face. "Yes," she admitted. "My heart was pounding out of my chest. The fear was very real." She paused, letting her sincerity land. "But then I recognized another fear, a much greater one. It was the fear of living a life of silence, of watching injustice win again and again until I, too, believed I was small and invisible." She looked directly into the camera lens, her voice steady. The fear of staying silent in the face of injustice was far greater. "I just chose the lesser fear." That answer, crystallized from a single act of courage and proven by a year of relentless work, became a living legacy. It was not just the story of a single, fateful night, but the story of how courage can open a door, and intellect is what helps you walk through it.